I saw this earlier today, and it's just an example of how Wikipedia is biased. They're sniping at the book of Genesis. They want to attack and undermine it. This kind of thing is common in how they write. So, regarding Genesis, it says the primeval history, which is the first part rather than the second part, sets out the authors or authors' concepts of the nature of deity and humankind's relationship with its maker. God creates a world which is good and fit for mankind, but when man corrupts it with sin, God decides to destroy his creation, saving only the righteous Noah to reestablish the relationship between man and God. First of all, I don't think that's a great description, because it says it's about the relationship between the deity and humankind, which is part of it, but I've read some Genesis, and it talks about how God created the earth in 7 days and rested on the seventh, or he created it in 6 days and rested on the seventh or something. He said, like, let there be light. He said, like, be fruitful and multiply. And there is some shit about, like, actually creating the world, not just about his relationship to humanity. But that's not the main point. That is just typical. It's not the best writing or best description or whatever. That's just like a minor quality issue. Now, the main point is that this is super biased. Now, first of all, author or authors, they're inserting into this, completely off topic, that the Bible might have had multiple authors, which is an attempt to undermine its legitimacy. They're also trying to hint or suggest that the Bible had human authors, contrary to the ones that are, the religion thinks it had. They're trying to suggest the authors are unknown, or it's like different authors than you think they are, because they say authors rather than whoever was supposed to have written it. Was it Moses? I'm not religious. I never went to Sunday school, so I don't even know, but was Moses the one who was supposed to have written this? It doesn't even say who's supposed to have written it. It snipes at the authoring, but tradition credits Moses as the author of Genesis, so they put that later. Right, so here they're just like, it sets out the author or author's concepts of nature, but it doesn't mention Moses. So if you're super ignorant about the Bible like me, or even more ignorant maybe, you might not even know what it has to do with Moses. Like, here it mentions Moses, but it's not talking about him as an author. You only get that down here. Are they saying all of them, including Genesis, was made in the 5th or 6th centuries BC? Oh, that's BC, not AD. That makes more sense then. When was Moses, though? They didn't even link him. I mean, they link him here, but not when they actually introduced him. Wait, did I click on the wrong thing? Oh, here's Moses. What are the dates on Moses? Normally when you look up historical figures, you get the dates on literally the first line. That's a very standard encyclopedia thing. Okay, so Moses is like 1500 years BCE, not 500. So they're saying that Genesis was written 1,000 years after Moses. Anyways, okay, so the author or authors, the idea of multiple authors, is a snipe at the legitimacy of the book. The paragraph where they mention Moses snipes at the legitimacy of the book by saying modern scholars think that basically smart modern experts know that religion is bullshit lies. That's what this paragraph means. Right, so even if you delete this, though, it's still weird. And even if you ignore that it said authors rather than like Moses's, it's still weird. Because the point of this sentence is to say, what is this chapter about? And the thing it's about is the nature of deity and humankind's relationship with its makers. Something like that. So the normal way to say this would just be, the primeval history sets out, I'll just fix it. There, that's it. You just delete that part. It's completely unnecessary modifier. It's off topic. You don't need any text there whatsoever. This would just be the normal presentation. It sets out, and then you say the topic that it sets out. So the fact there's any text there at all, even if the text didn't have two biases inside it, would still be biased. So that they put the modifier at all, that they say authors instead of Moses's, and that they then put the multi-author thing as a parenthetical. So it's a triple biased sentence. In addition to the quality not being great. Like, I didn't think it was a good explanation like I talked about earlier. So, I will pop out the chat and give the link. Okay. So that is Wikipedia versus religion. That is not a very good argument for multiple authors. There are other ways that could happen, like, because these books got copied by like monks or whatever, nuns, I don't know. And so it's possible that some of the people who did the copying did not copy word for word. And it could be the original just always said Elohim, and then one of the copiers kept changing it to Elohim Yahweh, and one of them did not. Because the one had like strong opinions that it should be Elohim Yahweh, and the other did. So you have like different people preserving the text, screwing with it. That's one of the things that would happen, and that would not constitute different authors. Like, I would not really strongly expect us to have actual exact or accurate quotes of the original text. I would expect there to be, you know, the game like Phone or the name's something like Phone. Telephone, where you're at like the dinner table with a bunch of people, and you like whisper something into the ear of the person next to you, and then they whisper it to the next person, and so on. And when it gets to run back to you, it's completely different. You're supposed to just say the same thing you heard, and it goes around through like a dozen people, and it gets totally lost in translation, and it's a totally different word or short phrase or sentence. So I'd expect that kind of thing to happen with such an old text, especially one where like book preservation methods were a lot worse back then. It had to be like recopied periodically, which would add extra opportunities for changes to get introduced. And some of the people doing the copying might have been opinionated. They weren't all. I think that the idea of exact copies and exact quoting is sort of modern. Like scholars actually trying to quote things exactly correctly is I think a pretty modern expectation. In the past, I think people are a lot more cavalier about that, a lot more sloppy. They're a lot more just forging quotes or just changing them carelessly. People did not have the attitude that like getting every little tiny detail right matters in general. I think that was a rare kind of attitude that has improved with the Enlightenment and the Industrial Revolution and modern science and stuff like that. We've gotten better about details. This kind of thing is not out of the question. It's very hard to know. It doesn't matter that much. Like I think that they're wrong to say that this would undermine religion significantly. I think that's a bad issue for people to debate and think is like really important. Like who the authors were is not really very relevant to how useful the ideas are. But people are very caught up on that. And then so there's this comment. The critical rationalist way says, I want to help. So most people don't want to help. Not really. And they won't say it, and they don't really act like it. Of the people who do want to help, or they're interested or whatever, like of that subset, most of the people who say that kind of thing, and there have been, quite a few, do not do much about it, are not helpful. They do a lot more asking for help than doing anything to help others. And often they ask for a bunch of help, and then they spit in your face and leave. One of the messages that lots of them do not seem to like is that in order to help others or help the world, you must help yourself first. That has to be primary. And the reason they don't like that message is they want to say or claim that they're already good, they already know a lot, they already have their life under control, they're already helping themselves in lots of great ways. Something like that. From my perspective, they're not doing enough to learn, and they never have, and they need to sort of make up for their past not learning enough by doing a bunch of learning now. Whereas they think the learning they already did is like adequate, and so they just plain do not know enough to help the world or to be helpful with philosophy. Like the amount of philosophy you need to know to actually be helpful is really, really high compared to what people think it is. So like you shouldn't expect to be much help if you have not written over 1,000 FI emails. That is like a minimum starting point. I think it's unreasonable to expect to contribute very much if you haven't done that yet. 1,000 may sound like this huge unreasonable number to people, but that's like 3 a day for a year, or 1 a day for 3 years. In the long run, that's not actually very much. My post count is maybe 25,000. It's really hard to estimate. I think it might be more than that. It depends what you count somewhat. Like which email groups you count posts to, whether you count blog comments, etc. But anyways, if you count everything, I think there might be over like 50,000 things written. So 1,000 is not very many. Especially consider you probably learned slower than me. I'm like particularly exceptional at learning speed compared to everyone I've ever observed. And that's not only my opinion, it's the opinion of other people like David Deutsch, who have access to observe, prestigious people and stuff. And so, let's just assume that you learn, at 2/3 as fast as me, and it's probably less than that. Then, if you want to contribute a lot and sort of catch up to what's already known, maybe you should be writing more posts than I have rather than fewer. Now, there are certain advantages you have because you get to read my posts, so that'll help you learn faster. So maybe you factor that in, and your overall learning speed could be faster than mine because you got that great resource to help you. But still, to a first approximation, you should maybe try to write as much stuff as I've written if you want to know roughly as much as me. Now, in order to be helpful, you don't have to know as much as me as I do today, but you need to get, say, more than half the way there. I think that's fair. If you know less than half as much as me, it's hard to contribute much or be very helpful with philosophy because philosophy is very, very correctness oriented or focused or whatever. Like if you're making mistakes, that tends not to be very actually productive. Like it's really important to get it right if you want to be useful and helpful. If you're getting stuff wrong, it's just practice and learning, hopefully. And it's better to go into it with an attitude of practice and learning, because if you're getting stuff wrong while trying to make finished products to help others, that's generally not going to be great for practice and learning because you're not trying to do those things, and also not going to be great for helping others. And it'll put me in a situation of, on the one hand, I can ignore it, and on the other hand, I can give a bunch of criticism, in which case you're, rather than contributing something, you're using helping resources where I try to help you. Writing's not the only thing. Like, of course, you should read books and read blog posts and so on and so forth. But a lot of what people do when they go to read stuff is they read it by themselves, alone, and then they misunderstand a lot of it because that's inevitable. If you read, a difficult book with a bunch of complicated ideas, you're going to have misunderstandings about it. And so, what you need to do is, as you're reading it, not later, not based on memory, but as you're reading it, talk about it and get feedback on your ideas. That way you can get some of your errors corrected quickly before you're even done reading the book. And that way you can read later parts of the book or reread the current part in light of this new understanding or insight, rather than in light of or in context of or using for interpretive theories your errors. Correcting an error about how you're seeing the book helps you see other text in a new way. The world has a lot of philosophy material of varying kinds where the quality is not high enough, and so it's not helpful because it spreads misconceptions, it contradicts some of the right ideas, it actually works against them, and it sanctions or repeats or endorses or whatever some of the irrational ideas of our culture, so it helps strengthen them not just by advocating them or accepting them, but also by giving them the legitimacy of philosophy. If a philosopher is accepting some parochial aspect of our culture, it makes it look like, the best thinkers accept it. It's not just the masses who accept it, so that makes it appear even better. You want to be careful not to contribute to those problems. Another big issue is just people are on the wrong side of issues they're doing advocacy on, or even people who are on the right side of issues and they're doing advocacy. That's often just because they got lucky. It's not like they researched it that much more than their opponents, if at all more. They just happen to be on the right side by luck. And when you're on the right side by luck, you can't explain it well enough. You don't know what the opposing position is clearly enough. You're not in a good position to talk about these things. One of the things that's particularly needed is, before doing mass sharing of ideas and trying to help large numbers of people with a one-size-fits-many educational materials, is to have success cases, even single individuals. Before you can write an article that you expect to help a lot of people, you need to be able to help one person even, or two people. So that is advice both for the would-be helper, that you need to test your material and see that it's actually helping some individuals before you try for mass distribution. It is also, it's a thing I need, if you could actually learn the stuff I'm teaching or explaining, that would give me a success case. I could see which parts worked for you, which parts actually were capable of working and helped someone, and so on, because it's very hard to get any success cases at all. So if you could be a success case, that would be important. There are other things that are possible to do to help other than being a good enough thinker, but none of them are very reliable. So like, you might think you can get an audience, get more fans, and then link to my stuff a lot, and it'll point more people to my stuff, and then you'll be helping even if you're not the best thinker. Because you could certainly get some popularity without learning all the philosophy. So there are a couple problems with that. One is, your fans who like your not great philosophy, or whatever else you're making, it'll be even harder if you're making something non-philosophical, and will not be inclined to like my work. They won't be suited for that. I think the basic audience issue is not that I have too little traffic seeing anything I do, it's that it's not sticky enough. The conversion rate is too low. Most people who see my stuff don't get very involved, don't like it that much. So adding a bit more traffic of people who are not super intellectual might not get any like serious fans, or very few. But also, if you are pandering to the masses to some extent, so if you're pandering and you're not that great, what exactly is going to keep it so that you actually like me going forward? What I would expect to happen is you'll start to think what you're doing is pretty good. You will rationalize it instead of, for the rest of your life thinking that you're just sort of a low skill pretender or a second rater. People don't want to think of themselves as second raters. That's not compatible very well with having self-esteem. So most people, even if that was like their plan, is I will admit to myself honestly that I'm a second rater, and then I will get some fans or some money, and then I will contribute them to FI. It works with money as well as fans. Like, you can just, get a software job and then donate half the money to FI rather than being involved with FI yourself. You could have a plan like that. But if you see yourself as a second rater, that's like psychologically hard. So most people, like, it's possible to see it that way and be okay with it, but most people will not. They're not going to like it. They want to see themselves as a first rater, as an important person, not as always second best or even, 200th best. So what happens is eventually, if someone's not making progress and not learning it, they're going to rationalize why I'm actually wrong in some way, why some of what they're doing is better than what I'm doing, why they have more fans than me, or whatever it is. Like, if they're having some sort of success, they're going to think they merit that success and I don't, because I don't have it, if it's success they have and I don't. And they're going to think they're better than me in some ways, and they're going to get alienated from what I'm saying. It's very hard to maintain the perspective of actually liking me while living in a way kind of incompatible with personally being good at FI stuff. It's hard to say, I'm going to help other people learn FI, but I've sort of given up on it for myself, and to actually consistently want that for your whole life and never change your mind and never make excuses and rationalize it in order to have more self-esteem or whatever. So that kind of thing generally doesn't work well. It's easier with money, because you can say to yourself, I'm good at software, but not philosophy. But philosophy is important, so I will contribute to philosophy monetarily. The same way people do that with curing cancer. Like, they don't lose self-esteem by knowing they're not a cancer researcher, so they can donate to fund cancer research without feeling bad about themselves. Whereas if you're actually a public intellectual of some sort who is attracting an audience and trying to direct it in my direction, it's a lot harder to have that kind of separation where you're like, I'm an expert on something else. Most people who want to help also, regardless of what they do, even if they're just trying to learn it, they end up getting stuck in some way. And giving up. Most people, they just sort of fail at learning philosophy. And there are common patterns, and I've written about them. One of the common patterns is, initially, the person makes some progress, and they think it's great, and they're learning some things. And at some point, they hit a hard part. They get kind of stuck. Their progress slows way down. They're stuck on the same problem for, say, 3 months. Previously, they were never stuck on anything for more than a few days, and now they've been stuck for a long time. They're not getting it. And a lot of times, the first time someone gets majorly stuck, they stay stuck forever, and it starts changing them. And the reason is, that they were never that good at error correction, at getting unstuck. Initially, they made progress on the parts that are intuitive for them, that were easy for them, that clicked in a natural way, that fit their prior ideas in some sense. And then when they ran out of low-hanging fruit and they ran into a hard part, they didn't know how to do error correction, defeat obstacles, do problem solving. And so that's what happens with a lot of people, is when they run into a significant problem, then they're just permanently stuck. So one of the things you should do if you want to help is do something about that. So my basic advice for how to deal with that is when people get stuck like that, they're trying to solve a problem that is too hard for them. Therefore, they need to change goals in the shorter term and solve easier problems and practice problem solving. And then you solve level 1 problems, and then when you can solve 99 out of 100 level 1 problems successfully with very low effort and low attention and very high reliability, it works 99 out of 100 times, then you can move on to level 2 problems, and then you get the same extremely high reliable success rate on level 2 problems, and then you move on to level 3, and you work your way up to that level 20 problem you were stuck on. Most people are not willing to go on a long sort of tangent or side quest like that. They just want to do the hard stuff at the beginning, and they never want to do the easy stuff. But if you'll actually learn grammar or Mario Odyssey speedrunning or basic logic or learn programming would be an example of a useful side quest, which of course divides into many, many sub-problems, but overall, you can do things like that as a way of better learning how to learn, in addition to the topic itself having some use. And it is realistic to expect to do several side quests before you can solve hard philosophy problems and get unstuck on some major philosophy problem. And most people just aren't willing to do that. And why is so much philosophy skill needed to be effective or whatever? The short answer is our culture is bad at philosophy. So if you're 90th percentile, you're bad at philosophy. The minimum standards of just not being bad at philosophy today put you easily in the top 1%. They make you an expert. Oh, by the way, speaking of text analysis, and this is related to something Justin was asking about on stream the other day. He was asking about how to learn logic. So I guess I'm going to change I'll change the writing number at some point. Anyways, how to learn logic. First of all, just actually do stuff like look through several books on logic and see what they're like, and see if they seem useful to you, and if not, what do you think's wrong with them? How are they different than what you want? So just review your options, try to figure out what the situation is, what the problems are, etc. Do some of the activities that our culture thinks will help you learn logic, and see how you like them and if they help, and so on. Just try a variety of stuff and see how it goes and evaluate it, and then you can decide, okay, what's missing, what specific things are not working that I should look for, and then you can do some more targeted searching of resources, because there are a lot of resources. So you can look at some general introductory ones, and then you can look at some targeted ones related to whatever you think would make it better, which is kind of how you learn a lot of things, like anything that has a lot of resources to help with. It's really just up to you to do it. One of the problems I think is common to the resources is they're a bit narrow and technical, and which is an okay place to start. If you can't get the narrow technical stuff right, you're not going to do the applications to philosophy discussions, where it's less clear cut. So it's fine to start there with the narrow technical stuff. That makes it simpler and easier. That's better. Then in the longer run, it's harder to find, I think, materials where you're actually going to apply what you're learning very usefully to real world discussion scenarios. And what I wanted to say about that was I had a practice suggestion, which is I'm going to save the Discord log of my discussions with Hopniger and Felix the Cat from a few days ago. And in those discussions, they make logical errors. There's more Hopniger who had more discussion and made a bunch of logic errors. And I one of the things that makes this suitable for practice, the basic idea of practicing is you go through the discussion, you look for logic errors, and you try to point some out and explain them in detail. This is multi-purpose. It's practice for you, and also Hopniger might learn something from it. Maybe it'll save her. And if not that, other people might learn something from it. If you point out some logic errors, it could help other people with learning logic, like anyone, not just her. And it's connected to stuff you already are interested in, I think. Like, I think Justin and probably a few other people already read that stuff and was already interested in it. So it's a good thing to practice on in that way. And it's very realistic. And also it has a very nice trait, which is that I pointed out some of the logic errors. I often didn't really explain it, but I pointed out like X as a logic error to get some hints like that. I didn't point them all out, but there are definitely places where I said a particular thing was a logic error, so you'll know, okay, I should analyze this part and see if I can figure out why that's a logic error. So that is a useful thing for practice, even if Hopniger was not interested in discussing why those things were logic errors. Her response to that kind of thing was never to ask, why is that a logic error? Let's pause the discussion and just talk about this one thing because I really want to understand logic better. That sounds important. If I'm mistaken, I'd really want to learn better. And if you're mistaken, then you made a logic error, and so you should learn better, so we should focus on it. Like, she never wanted to do that kind of thing. And the other thing that's good about it is it has a lot of interesting content where I say interesting things, including extended sections where I just talk by myself about philosophy in general, fairly like impersonally, or of general interest philosophy. So there's that mixed in as well. So even if it's someone who has not already read it or was not already interested in it, it has that to make it interesting.